In your article, responding to Rand Fishkin's article, and again, the claim being that content marketers shouldn't publish stuff that's not better than what AI can produce. I think that you generally agree with that. And specifically, you write, and now I'm just going to quote here directly from your article. You write that, quote, to be successful, content marketers will need to rise well above that fray with timely content, unique examples, original research, novel ideas, and compelling, authentic, and trustworthy voices. So there's a lot packed into that one sentence, and I want to try to unpack it a little bit. First, starting broadly, how is what you just described, how is that kind of content better than what AI can generate?
Sure. So I think one of the key challenges in this kind of new age of generative AI is to produce content that people can't easily get elsewhere. Because to put it another way, brands need to create unique content if they want to stand out in search engine results and, more importantly, in the minds of consumers. And that's because generative AI is going to allow brands to pretty easily create decent content on well covered topics. And I think that's that new floor that Rand Fishkin is talking about. Is that you're going to be able to very easily create decent content on well covered topics, of which obviously there are many, 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 depending on your industry. Being timely or newsy is one of the ways to rise above that floor, especially since most large language models and LLMs currently don't know anything really about what's happened in the past year or two. Obviously, that'll change in the future, but right now, being timely is definitely important, a way to rise above that fray. Having really novel ideas or a really unique point of view on a topic is another way to differentiate your content. And when you use those two approaches, you can pretty much avoid competing with AI content completely. But that said, it's not about necessarily avoiding it completely because there are a lot of uses for AI generated content. I speak to a lot of people. Certainly, you need to write about well tread topics, and sometimes using AI to get a feel or a good starting point makes a lot of sense. So you can definitely differentiate yourself on those well-trod topics by weaving in brand unique content, and that would be things like customer examples and case study references, using original like poll results or other kinds of research that you might have, using original illustrations or photos, and then weaving in on a smaller scale sort of novel ideas and opinions that you might have, especially if you can quote folks within your organization. So all of those are ways that you can inject your brand into content that ostensibly started with sort of AI generated content that was drawing from the great masses of
Hmm.
information out there on a well trod topic. I think about this as like a content Christmas tree. So
Hmm.
AI generated content can give you a basic tree about a well trod topic. But if you want to make it unique, you need to add in these brand unique elements, really decorate that tree and make it special, really make it light up with your brand and your brand voice.
Also in your article, and I want to quote a little bit more because I'm especially intrigued by the phrase, and now I'm quoting you directly, compelling, authentic, and trustworthy voices. And I think you make the point that it's trust really that is at the core of this. So, what does that look like to you? Like these compelling, authentic, trustworthy voices. What do you have in mind? Or like what are some examples of that?
I think it all comes down to having a point of view, like a
Hmm.
vision that you're inviting others to take part in. And I feel like in our like day-to-day lives as consumers, like we really know what that looks like across like the broad spectrum of ways that we interact. So it's folks like Greta Thunberg and Anderson Cooper, Tucker Carlson, Paul Krugman, David Brooks, Warren Buffett, all these people, regardless of how you might feel about these individuals, they have very well articulated and strong points of view that attract loyal audiences for their organizations.
Hmm.
So, in our day to day, I think we recognize what that looks like. I'd say, like in the B2B space, I think it's folks like Jay Baer, Joe Paluzzi, Andy Cresadina, Ann Hanley. And if you haven't already signed up for Ann's Total Anarchy newsletter, you should. That I think is a lesson in being compelling, authentic, and
Hmm.
trustworthy. Her newsletters are fantastic. In the email marketing space that I live in, there are absolutely certain people I pay extra attention to: Gene Jennings, Ryan Phelan, Kath Pay, Matt Furnout. I think a lot of it is people. You see me listing people.
Yeah.
I think the voice is people for the most part, but I do think there are some brands who have a voice of their own that also transcend. And we think we know what that looks like as well. It's brands like maybe the New York Times or Uncommon Goods or Chubbies. There's certain brands that have like a very, the hustle, that have like very clear voices and are very consistent over time. And
Hmm.
that also builds trust as well.
Looking ahead, do you see this content floor that AI is creating just sort of rising and rising and rising to the point where it's like an arms race? Like we poor humans have to just keep upping our game in order to compete?
Yeah, so I do think that's true. I think over time it is going to get better and better. Microsoft alone has pledged or is in the process of investing $10 billion
Yeah.
in generative. And that's on top of everything they've already invested. And that's just Microsoft. So there is a lot of money that's being invested into these models. They are absolutely going to get better. ChatGPT 3.5 is not nearly as good as 4. I think we're going to see like very substantial upticks in usage. And I think the other thing that's frightening is that I think everybody is thinking that like LLMs are the thing. These large language models like ChatGPT, they're like, that's the model. And I think we've already seen that there's lots of problems with LLMs, especially in terms of like reliability of information, accuracy, and citations and things like that. It may not be the final model. There may be a new model that's completely different than LLMs that actually is the superior one. And if that happens, then this whole Darwinian contest gets to reset and we get to up the tension. But
Mhm.
yes, I do think that it's absolutely going to get better over time, easier to train. The window of training is going to get more much closer to real time. I think there's going to be a lot of advances that will make it better. However, I think it always comes back to trust. And for me, that's people. People and trust. That's what business is. Again, to bring it back to B2B, and I think it's like really top of mind for us here at Oracle Marketing Consulting because we're an agency or 100% a people business. Like when you hire us, you get to work
Mhm.
with some of the talented people that you get to read on our blog and see on our webinars. Like we're people. I think there is a point at which like you're messing with that and you have to be really careful because I feel like
Mhm.
all relationships, business, personal, otherwise, are built on trust, and that's a prerequisite for building value. And I would argue that people are that prerequisite for building trust for companies, especially again if you're any kind of service oriented company. So I think there is like a fundamental alchemy that AI is being injected into. And I don't know that fundamental alchemy of how business works, how trust works, how a relationship works. I don't know what degree you can inject generative AI into that before you start to break it and cause real crises of trust. You think about writing, I think a lot of B2B brands are excited to use generative AI to do like cold outreach emails.
Mhm.
If people then bite and engage and they find out that you are like wildly different from
Mm.
the outreach that you sent, I would think that would cause trust issues. And especially if there's a lot of that back and forth. And then there's that moment where, like, and you're really different.
Mhm.
What does that say? I think some people feel like that's disingenuous, at least, and perhaps much worse.
Mhm.
Because in the end, again, all business is people. That's who we're signing contracts with. That's who we're doing
Yeah.
work with. There, I think, are some exceptions to that rule, but I think for the vast majority of brands, that's what it comes down to. And so I think
Mhm.
that's the balance that we're going to be really struggling with over time. And again, I think this is going to be a big cultural issue. Congress is already thinking about getting involved, and they're not the best at all at
Yeah.
regulating technology or even understanding technology. But I think even they recognize how disruptive this could be.
Mhm.
And there's this balance between efficiency, which generative AI can definitely offer that. But then there's all of these other issues around trust and authenticity and representation that
Yeah.
are super, super important.